They killed Socrates for making people think too deeply. They exiled Machiavelli for exposing the truth about power. Every man in history who sharpened his mind beyond what was acceptable was silenced, discredited, or destroyed, because a truly sharp mind is the most dangerous force on earth, and the world has always known it. Now ask yourself, when was the last time someone felt genuinely threatened by how you think? When was the last time your intelligence made a powerful person uncomfortable? If you can't answer that, you're not sharp enough yet. You're still operating at a level where you are tolerated, not feared, where you are liked, not respected, where you are included, not analyzed. That ends today. What you are about to hear is not inspiration. It is not motivation. It is a precise reconstruction of how your mind operates, built on Machiavellian philosophy, cold psychological truth, and the kind of ruthless self-mastery that turns ordinary men into forces that cannot be ignored. This is the path that separates the remembered from the forgotten, the powerful from the powerless, the hunter from the hunted. Drop a comment right now and write, "I think, therefore I dominate." Let me know you are ready for what comes next. Number 2, the philosophy of the sharp mind. Machiavelli understood something that most men spend their entire lives avoiding. The world does not reward goodness. It rewards effectiveness. It does not bow to the man with the purest heart. It bows to the man with the sharpest mind. This is not cynicism. This is not darkness for the sake of darkness. This is the cold, unfiltered structure of how reality truly operates beneath the polished surface of social niceties and comfortable illusions we have all been conditioned to accept. Strip away the illusions, strip away the flattery, strip away everything you were taught in classrooms designed to produce obedient workers rather than independent thinkers. And what you are left with is this brutal truth. The man who thinks with clarity, moves with precision, and sees ahead will always dominate the man who simply works harder. Hard work without strategic intelligence is just suffering with a respectable reputation. Machiavelli watched princes rise and fall. He studied power not from a throne, but from exile, which made his insights sharper, colder, and more honest than any comfortable court philosopher could ever produce. He saw that the men who lasted, the ones who built legacies that echoed through centuries, were not the most virtuous or the most loved. They were the most aware. Aware of human nature, aware of perception, aware of timing, aware of when to speak and when to remain dangerously silent. That awareness, that razor-sharp, almost predatory level of mental clarity is exactly what we are building inside you today. Because here is what dark psychology teaches that conventional wisdom never will. Most people operate on autopilot, driven by ego, emotion, and unconscious bias. They react instead of respond. They perform instead of strategize. They seek validation instead of leverage. And the man who understands this, the man who can read a room, read a person, read a situation with cold precision while everyone else is still catching up emotionally, that man holds invisible power over every interaction he enters. He does not need to announce his intelligence. The room already feels it. Number 3, kill the average mind inside you. Before you can dominate the world outside you, you must fight the most brutal war of your life, and it takes place entirely inside your own mind, because the greatest enemy you will ever face is not a rival, not a competitor, not someone smarter or more connected than you. The greatest enemy is the average mind you were given by a society that needed you manageable, predictable, and just ambitious enough to be productive, but never dangerous enough to be truly free. That mind was built through years of conditioning, years of being rewarded for memorizing instead of questioning, years of being praised for conformity instead of originality. Years of being told that intelligence means having the right answers, when the most powerful minds in history were obsessed with asking the right questions. And that conditioning runs deep, deeper than you think. It appears when you hesitate before speaking your true opinion in a room full of people. It appears when you shrink your ambitions to match the comfort level of those around you. It appears when you feel guilty for wanting more, for thinking bigger, for refusing to accept the ceiling that mediocrity keeps trying to place over your head. Killing that average mind is not comfortable. It is not a motivational task you complete in a weekend. It is a daily, deliberate, almost violent act of mental reconstruction. It means reading what challenges you, not what comforts you. It means sitting in silence long enough to hear your own thoughts clearly instead of drowning them in noise and distraction. It means ruthlessly auditing every belief you hold and asking one cold Machiavellian question: Does this belief make me more powerful, or does it keep me controllable? Because every belief that keeps you small, every thought pattern that keeps you reactive, every mental habit that keeps you predictable, that is not your personality, that is your cage. And the first act of a truly sharp mind is recognizing the bars before it begins bending them. Right now, drop a comment and write, "I am the weapon," because that is exactly what we are building. Number 4, the art of cold observation. The sharpest weapon Machiavelli ever identified was not ambition, not ruthlessness, not even intelligence in the conventional sense. It was observation, cold, patient, almost inhuman observation. The ability to watch people, truly watch them, without the fog of emotion, without the distortion of ego, without the desperate need to be seen while you are still in the process of seeing. Most men are too busy performing to ever truly observe. They walk into a room thinking about how they appear instead of what they can learn. They sit in conversations waiting for their turn to speak instead of listening for what is actually being communicated beneath the words. They are so consumed by the theater of social interaction that they completely miss the intelligence operation happening right in front of them. And that is exactly where the man with a sharpened mind gains his first invisible advantage. Because when you train yourself to observe without agenda, when you develop the discipline to be the quietest, most watchful presence in any environment, you begin to notice things that others cannot. You see the micro-expressions that contradict the words being spoken. You see the power dynamics shifting beneath polished smiles and firm handshakes. You see who defers to whom, who performs confidence versus who actually possesses it, who is threatened by silence, and who is completely comfortable within it. You begin to read people like open books while remaining yourself an enigma, unreadable, unpredictable, and therefore deeply unsettling to those who need to categorize you in order to feel safe around you. This is what dark psychology calls strategic awareness, and it is one of the most lethal cognitive tools a man can develop. It transforms every social environment into a chessboard, every conversation into an intelligence-gathering exercise, every interaction into an opportunity to understand the hidden motivations, the secret insecurities, and the unconscious patterns of the people you are dealing with. Machiavelli wrote that the wise man must observe more than he speaks, for the man who speaks constantly reveals everything while learning nothing. But the man who watches, who truly, coldly, patiently watches, accumulates knowledge like a silent vault. And knowledge in the hands of a sharp mind does not simply become understanding. It becomes leverage, it becomes timing, it becomes the ability to move 3 steps ahead of every person in the room while they are still trying to understand your first move. Train your eyes before you sharpen your tongue. Master observation before you master persuasion. Because the man who sees everything and reveals nothing holds a power so quiet, so invisible, and so absolute that most people will never even realize they have already lost. Number 5, the silence that commands respect. There is a particular kind of man that makes powerful people uneasy. He does not do it with aggression. He does not do it with loud declarations of dominance or performative displays of strength. He does it with something far more unsettling, far more psychologically disruptive to the ego-driven minds around him. He does it with silence. Controlled, deliberate, almost weaponized silence. And in a world addicted to noise, to constant output, to the compulsive need to fill every empty space with words, opinions, and reactions, that silence cuts like a blade. Most men have never been taught the power of silence because the systems that shaped them needed them vocal, reactive, and emotionally readable. A man who reacts is a man who can be manipulated. A man who constantly speaks is a man who constantly reveals. But a man who sits in silence, who can absorb pressure, absorb provocation, absorb the emotional weight of a room without flinching, without filling the space, without surrendering his composure, that man communicates something no words ever could. He communicates that he cannot be shaken, that he cannot be rushed, that he operates on his own timeline in his own psychological territory, completely immune to the social pressure that controls almost everyone else in the room. Machiavelli understood that the prince who speaks less is always perceived as knowing more. Silence creates mystique. Mystique creates intrigue. Intrigue creates power. Because the human mind is wired to fill gaps. And when you refuse to give people the complete picture of who you are, what you think, and what you intend, their imagination begins to construct a version of you that is almost always more formidable than reality. You become larger in their minds than you could ever make yourself through self-promotion. You become a question they cannot answer, a force they cannot fully calculate, and nothing unsettles a person more deeply than something they cannot calculate. But understand this, the silence we are talking about is not empty silence. It is not the silence of a man with nothing to say. It is the silence of a man with everything calculated and nothing yet revealed. It is the silence of a chess grandmaster who already sees the endgame while his opponent is still studying the opening move. It is the silence that communicates without a single word that you are the most dangerous mind in the room, precisely because you have not yet chosen to prove it. Dark psychology teaches us that people instinctively assign authority to those who do not seek approval through constant communication. The man who needs to explain himself is the man who doubts himself. The man who needs to fill silence is the man who fears what that silence might expose about his own insecurity. But the man who embraces silence, who wears it like armor, who uses it like a scalpel, controls the emotional temperature of every room he enters. He decides when conversations accelerate and when they stop. He decides what gets revealed and what remains buried in the vault of his own calculated awareness. Practice silence not as absence, but as presence. The most powerful presence you will ever project is the one that makes people lean in, speak more, reveal more, and constantly wonder, what is he thinking? Because the man everyone is trying to figure out is the man no one can ever truly outmaneuver. Drop a comment right now and write, "Silence is my sharpest weapon," because if you have made it this far, you already understand what most people never will. Number 6. The Machiavellian mind in human relationships. Machiavelli wrote that men are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers. He was not being bitter. He was not being cynical for the sake of it. He was being precise. He was doing what the sharpest minds have always done, observing human nature without the sentimental filter that most people desperately cling to. Because the unfiltered truth is too uncomfortable for most to face. And the truth is this: the majority of human relationships, when stripped of their warmth and social performance, are transactional structures built on perceived value, mutual utility, and the silent, unspoken question that every person asks of every other person they encounter. What does this person do for me, for my status, for my security, for my ambition? Now, before you reject that idea, understand something critical. Accepting this reality does not make you cold. It does not make you heartless. It makes you free, because the man who understands the true mechanics of human relationships stops being blindsided by betrayal. He stops being shattered by disloyalty. He stops giving his trust to people who never earned it, his energy to people who never deserved it, and his vulnerability to people who were never capable of protecting it. He moves through relationships with clarity instead of illusion, with strategy instead of desperation, and with a quiet, composed selectivity that the emotionally undisciplined will mistake for coldness, but is actually the highest form of self-respect. The Machiavellian mind does not hate people. It simply sees them accurately. It understands that loyalty must be built through consistent demonstration, not assumed through affection. It understands that most people will support you loudly when you are rising and distance themselves quietly when you are struggling, not because they are evil, but because they are human, and humans are wired for survival and association with perceived strength. Knowing this does not make you bitter. It makes you a better architect of your own inner circle. You stop building your world around people who are emotionally convenient and start building it around people who are genuinely aligned. People whose ambitions, values, and psychological makeup actually complement the man you are becoming rather than subtly threatening it. Dark psychology teaches something even deeper than this: that the most dangerous people in your life are rarely the ones who openly oppose you. They are the ones who smile warmly, speak supportively, and subtly, almost invisibly, drain your momentum every time you are around them. They ask questions designed to plant doubt. They offer advice engineered to create hesitation. They celebrate your past victories loudly while quietly undermining your future ones. These people are not always aware of what they are doing, but aware or not, the effect on a man who cannot read the room is the same: erosion. Slow, invisible, cumulative erosion of his confidence, his clarity, and his forward momentum. The sharpened mind identifies these dynamics early. It does not explode into confrontation. It does not perform dramatic exits. It simply recalibrates quietly, efficiently, and without explanation. adjusting access, adjusting information flow, adjusting emotional investment with the cold precision of a man who understands that his energy is his most limited and therefore most valuable resource. Because here is the Machiavellian truth about relationships that no one will tell you openly. Every person you allow into your inner world either sharpens you or dulls you. They either add to your clarity or contaminate it. They either accelerate your evolution or anchor you to a version of yourself you were meant to outgrow. And the man with a truly sharpened mind treats his attention, his trust, and his presence not as things to be given freely in the hope of being liked, but as rare currencies to be invested deliberately in the people and environments most likely to compound his power, his peace, and his purpose. Guard your inner circle like a fortress, not with paranoia, but with precision, not with coldness, but with calm, unshakable discernment of a man who finally understands his own worth and refuses from this point forward to spend it carelessly. Number 7, the ruthless discipline of self-mastery. Every empire that has ever collapsed did not fall to external invasion first. It rotted from within. The walls did not collapse because the enemy was too strong. They collapsed because the foundation had been quietly weakening for years, compromised by comfort, complacency, and the slow, seductive erosion of discipline that always follows a man the moment he begins to believe he has already arrived. And what is true of empires is brutally true of men. The most dangerous threat to your rise is never the competitor outside you. It is the undisciplined version of yourself that wakes up every morning negotiating with your own potential, choosing comfort over growth, choosing distraction over depth, choosing the immediate relief of pleasure over the long-term compounding power of ruthless, relentless self-mastery. Machiavelli understood that the prince who could not govern himself could never truly govern others, not because of morality, not because of virtue in the soft, conventional sense, but because a man who is a slave to his own impulses, his moods, his need for instant gratification, that man is already controlled, already predictable, already vulnerable to anyone patient enough to study his patterns and pull the right strings at the right time. And in the game of power, a predictable man is a manipulable man. Full stop. Self-mastery is not the Instagram version of discipline, the cold showers, the 5 a.m. alarms, the aesthetic suffering performed for an audience. That is discipline as a costume. What we are talking about is something far deeper, far less glamorous, and infinitely more powerful. It is the discipline of the mind that refuses to be hijacked by emotion in moments that demand calculation. It is the discipline of the tongue that remains silent when reacting would feel satisfying, but responding strategically would be devastating. It is the discipline of the ego that can absorb disrespect without exploding, can absorb failure without collapsing, and can absorb success without becoming intoxicated by it. Because the man who loses his edge in victory is just as finished as the man who loses his nerve in defeat. Dark psychology reveals that the most controlled man in any environment holds disproportionate power over every uncontrolled person around him. Because emotional volatility is a broadcast signal. It shows everyone exactly where your triggers are, exactly what destabilizes you, exactly which buttons to press when they need to neutralize you. But the man who has done the brutal internal work of mastering his own emotional structure, who has sat with his rage and chosen precision over explosion, who has sat with his fear and chosen forward movement over retreat, who has sat with his desire and chosen strategy over impulse, that man becomes truly unreadable, truly unmanipulable, truly untouchable in the way that matters most, not physically but psychologically, because no one can weaponize what they cannot locate. And when your reactions are governed not by feeling but by intention, when your decisions are driven not by mood but by calculated purpose, when your presence communicates not chaos but absolute command of the only territory that was ever truly yours to conquer, your own mind, your own body, your own energy, you stop being a man that circumstances happen to. You become a man who makes things happen. You become the cause, not the effect, the architect, not the accident. And that shift, that quiet, devastating, internally forged shift from reactive to deliberate, is where average men end and Machiavellian minds begin. Master yourself first, completely and without mercy, because the man who owns himself cannot be owned by anyone else. And in a world full of men who are secretly for sale to whoever offers the right emotional currency, comfort, validation, belonging, fear, the man who is not for sale is the most powerful man in every room he enters. Number 8, the strategy of invisible dominance. The most powerful men in history were rarely the loudest ones in the room. They were not the ones standing on tables demanding recognition, performing their strength for an audience that needed convincing. They were the ones sitting quietly at the edge of the room, observing, calculating, and moving with such deliberate, invisible precision that by the time anyone realized what had happened, the game was already finished. The position was already secured. The outcome was already decided. And that is the highest expression of Machiavellian intelligence. Not the dominance that announces itself, but the dominance that embeds itself so deeply, so quietly, and so completely into the structure of a situation that it becomes indistinguishable from the natural order of things. This is what we call invisible dominance, and it is the most refined, most devastatingly effective form of power that a sharpened mind can wield. Most men have been conditioned to chase visible power, titles, status symbols, public validation, the performative markers of success that the average majority uses to measure worth, because they have never been taught to recognize the deeper, quieter currents of influence that actually move the world. They chase the appearance of power, while the truly powerful are busy constructing the reality of it, in back channels, in deliberate relationship architecture, in the careful, patient positioning of themselves at the intersections where information, resources, and decisions converge. Machiavelli called this virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but the dynamic, almost predatory ability to read the moment, seize the opportunity, and shape outcomes through intelligence rather than force. Because force is expensive, force creates resistance, force leaves visible marks and visible enemies. But influence, quiet, strategic, invisible influence, leaves no marks at all. It simply reshapes the environment around you until the people inside it begin moving in the direction you designed without ever feeling the hand that guided them there. Dark psychology teaches that the most effective form of control is the one that never feels like control to the person experiencing it. It is the reframing of a conversation so subtle that the other person believes the new direction was their own idea. It is the strategic use of information, what you share, what you hold back, when you reveal, and when you intentionally obscure. That shapes perception and therefore shapes reality in the minds of everyone you deal with. It is the understanding that in any room, in any negotiation, in any relationship dynamic, the person who controls the frame controls the outcome. And the person who controls the frame is almost never the one speaking the loudest. It is the one who set the terms before the conversation even began. Invisible dominance requires a level of patience most men do not possess, because most are too hungry for immediate recognition to play the longer, deeper, and infinitely more rewarding game of strategic positioning. They want to be seen as powerful right now, and that hunger, that impatience, that need for instant validation is the greatest barrier between where they are and where they could be. The Machiavellian mind starves that hunger deliberately. It trains itself to find satisfaction not in being recognized, but in being effective, not in being praised, but in being correct, not in winning the moment, but in owning the outcome. Because the man who needs no audience for his victories is the man whose victories are never performed. They are simply executed, quietly, completely, and with the cold, elegant precision of someone who understood the endgame long before anyone else had finished reading the opening. Drop a comment right now and write, "I move in silence and strike with precision." Because invisible dominance is not a tactic, it is a way of being, and the men who master it do not just win, they make winning look inevitable. Number 9, the price of becoming untouchable. Nobody tells you the full truth about what it costs to become the man we have been building throughout this entire monologue. They show you the throne, but they hide the road that leads to it, the isolation, the sacrifice, the long stretches of darkness where you are doing the work in complete silence with zero validation, zero applause, and zero guarantee that any of it will amount to anything. They sell you the destination and quietly omit the devastation of the journey. So let me be the one to tell you the truth. Because a Machiavellian mind does not deal in comfortable lies, not even the ones that would make this path sound more appealing than it actually is. Becoming untouchable has a price, and that price is steep, non-negotiable, and will be collected from you in ways you did not anticipate and cannot fully prepare for. The first thing you will lose is belonging. The moment you begin sharpening your mind beyond the level of the people around you, you will feel it. A slow, quiet, almost invisible widening of the distance between you and the world you once fit into so easily. Conversations that once pulled you in will begin to feel empty. Environments that once felt like home will start to feel like cages. People you once considered your equals will begin to sound like they are speaking a language you are quickly outgrowing. And the hardest part is that they will feel it too. And instead of being inspired by your evolution, many of them will feel threatened by it. They will not always confront you directly. That would require a level of courage most people do not have. Instead, they will move subtly, through passive undermining, through quiet distance, through the gradual withdrawal of the warmth and inclusion that once felt unconditional, but was actually dependent on you staying at a level that did not make them uncomfortable. This is not betrayal in the dramatic sense. It is simply the natural consequence of outgrowing a container. And the man who is serious about becoming untouchable must develop the psychological strength to endure that loneliness without allowing it to pull him back down to a size that fits more comfortably in spaces he has already outgrown. The second price is the death of your former self. And unlike loneliness, this one is not imposed from the outside. You must choose it deliberately, again and again, often painfully. Every version of yourself built on fear, on approval seeking, on the desperate need to be understood and accepted by people who were never truly capable of seeing you clearly, that version must die. Not symbolically, not slowly, but intentionally. Because that former self is not just a memory. It is an active force constantly pulling you back toward what is familiar, comfortable, and small. Machiavelli understood that transformation is not about addition, it is about subtraction. It is the ruthless removal of everything that no longer serves the man you are becoming. The beliefs, the relationships, the habits, the self-narratives, the unconscious scripts you inherited from people who never built anything worth inheriting. Strip it all away. Every layer placed on you by a world that needed you manageable must be examined, judged, and if found guilty of keeping you small, eliminated without sentiment and without apology. The third price is the burden of clarity. Because once you develop the level of perception we have been building here, once you can read rooms, read people, read power dynamics with cold and effortless precision, you cannot unsee it. You will notice manipulation in conversations that others experience as genuine. You will see insecurity beneath performances that others accept at face value. You will recognize the transactional structure beneath relationships that others believe are purely emotional. And carrying that level of clarity in a world built largely on comfortable illusions becomes its own kind of weight, a weight the untouchable man must learn to carry with composure, with compassion where it is deserved, and with the quiet, unshakable acceptance that seeing the world more clearly than most is not a curse. It is the inevitable result of refusing to remain blind. Pay the price, every part of it, because on the other side of that cost, beyond the loneliness, beyond the death of the former self, beyond the heavy burden of unfiltered clarity, stands a man that circumstances cannot break, that manipulation cannot reach, and that mediocrity cannot reclaim. A man who is not just successful, but sovereign, not just powerful, but free. Number 10, the final command. You have reached the end, and that alone separates you from the majority who clicked away when it became too real, too deep, too uncomfortably close to the truth they have been avoiding their entire lives. But you stayed, you listened, you sat with every uncomfortable word and allowed it to land where it needed to land. Not because it was easy, but because something inside you recognized it as truth. Hold on to that recognition. That is your compass. Everything we have covered in this monologue, the philosophy of the sharp mind, the destruction of average thinking, the cold art of observation, the weaponization of silence, the Machiavellian architecture of human relationships, the ruthless discipline of self-mastery, the strategy of invisible dominance, and the brutal price of becoming untouchable, none of it means anything if it stays inside this video. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. And you did not come here to be entertained. You came here to be transformed. So from this moment forward, carry yourself differently. Think differently. Move differently. Enter every room with the quiet, cold, unshakable awareness of a man who has done the internal work most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. Let your silence speak before your words. Let your presence command before your actions. Let your mind operate 3 levels deeper than every conversation you enter. And never, not for comfort, not for belonging, not for the temporary warmth of being accepted by people who were never built to understand you. Never shrink yourself back down to a size that fits someone else's limitations. You are building something rare, something the world both fears and desperately needs. A mind so sharp, so disciplined, so coldly aware that everyone around you quietly begins to feel average. Not because you diminished them, but because you refused to remain ordinary. This is the Machiavellian mind. This is who you are becoming. Drop a comment right now and write, "I am the Machiavellian mind." Claim it, own it, and mean it. If this monologue cut deep, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because what we are building here has only just begun.